Yeah. This way. Wherever you like. All right. Good morning. Thank you all for coming. Today is a much anticipated talk to our prosecutor. This is our elected official. One of the reasons that I wanted to make sure we got to talk to him, because a lot of people don't really understand the relationship of the prosecutor to the commissioner's office. Oftentimes people are asking me, what does he do? Why isn't he here? And how come we can't meet you guys? So he's going to answer all of those questions that we have, as well as tell you what a prosecutor in the county does, because unlike what we think, he is not just there responding to emails from the Board of Commissioners. There's a lot that goes behind the scenes. So I want to make sure that you guys have access to ask questions, get answers, but to also have a better understanding of the relationship between commissioners and council. And then also someone sent me a question, because they were not going to be here today, about there's a misunderstanding on when two commissioners can be in the same venue. So last week, Commissioner Ahmet came downstairs, and I made the comment he could take his seat up at the table, and someone said after the fact, I'm glad that he left because that would have been a quorum and you're not allowed to do that. That's not correct. We can be in the same existence at the same time. So there's a very specific issue related to a quorum, and being in the same room isn't one of those. So we want to kind of give an understanding to the community and answer some questions so that there's some clarity. So with that, Mr. Marshall, who doesn't even live in this building on purpose, he's down the road. So.
Yes, yeah. I've actually spent a lot more time in this building in the last year than I ever have in the previous 15. And I can't say all of it has been pleasant, but one of the things I think that people don't think about is that my job is really 90% criminal. Along with the sheriff, Sheriff Wheeler, he and I are the co-heads of law enforcement in Bonner County. And so that is my main focus, and personally that's my main focus. I've been steered away into the civil side quite a bit lately because of the dysfunction that's going on at the county and trying to assist in that matter. But the two different functions of the prosecuting attorney, criminal and civil, are very different. Criminal, the buck essentially stops with me. I'm it. I make the decisions, obviously with the help of law enforcement. But the buck stops there. In the civil world, I do not make decisions. We act as lawyers. And so we have all the functions of a lawyer that goes along with it, including privilege to our clients and a duty to our clients. And so that doesn't mean we always agree with the commissioners, let's say, or the other elected officials. We don't. But we are not going to come out publicly and say that we disagree with them, because that would be inappropriate, and it's not the function of a lawyer to do so. It's interesting. Idaho, and it's probably most states, but I think the legislators made like really smart decisions when they created it 100 years ago, 120 years ago, in that there's a lot of checks and balances within county government, the same as there is you see on the national level, and on the state level, and then down to the local level. And a lot of it makes sense in terms of there is not absolute power in any of the offices. And by the offices, I'm talking about the elected officials. They all have different separate functions, but they all have to meld together to work as a team, which is not always easy. The other interesting thing is people are always like, well, what's the law? Including my clients are always asking, well, what's the law? What's the statutes? And there are statutes, but they are not definitive a lot of times. And a lot of times they also contradict. And so as a lawyer, when statutes contradict or they're not clear, you look to case law. Judges decide how to interpret those statutes. Well, in Idaho, there's not a lot of case law on these things. And so there's this gray area. And a lot of the things that we've been dealing with the commissioners and the other elected officials are in the gray area. So there are not definitive answers to them. And that does make it difficult, because they look to me to say, well, what is it? What is the black letter law? And there isn't any. And so we have to make our best guess. And again, our role is just to advise them. It is not to make decisions for them. I have always warned my civil counsel, whether it be Mr. Bauer or Mr. Wilson, do not become the fourth commissioner. You are not elected by the people of Bonner County. and you certainly weren't elected to be the fourth commissioner. So sometimes boards of commissioners want the civil lawyer to kind of take that role. That is not our role. We are just a lawyer. I even told, I know Mr. Bauer used to sit up with the commissioners and he had his placard up there. I was like, don't do that. Sit out in the audience. You are not one of them for a number of reasons. But the main one is you didn't elect my civil deputies to be a commissioner, and you didn't elect me to be a commissioner, and I didn't run to be a commissioner. I'm never going to. So, I mean, sort of stay in your own camp, right? And so that's been a difficult thing too.
And we don't have to listen to you, which is a big
Correct.
thing, because you hear a lot in our county meetings where someone says, I'm going to consult our attorney. Consult doesn't mean I have to listen. It means maybe I sent an email. And so that's also sometimes confusing, is that when we ask for an opinion from counsel, it is more of a relationship the way you would if you hired an attorney, not that we are bound to do that. I think the other part that people don't, that's hard sometimes to understand, is that, for example, there was a question that came up over, are we following the rules in terms of how we do the meeting, or how this 9 a.m. was changed? He can say, sure, that didn't follow it, but sometimes the question is, well, what can we do about it? And so I can go to Lewis and say, what can I do about the fact that they changed something without being on the agenda? And what's your answer? Nothing. And that's what and it isn't because his office is ineffective, it's that's not their function. Okay, and I want to make sure we answer questions as they come up. Sherry Diwali has her hand up online.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. In addressing the comments that you're making there, can you address the code of ethics that commissioners are supposed to follow, and what happens if they don't?
Sherry, that's a good question. So we have the Bonner County Personnel Policy. The Bonner County Personnel Policy applies to employees of Bonner County. The 9 elected officials are not employees under Idaho law. So the only code of ethics, and it's not really ethics, that the commissioners have to follow is Idaho code, or federal law for that matter. So there isn't any. I am the only elected official that does, in the sense that I have bar rules with the Idaho State Bar, that I do have to follow those, Idaho Rules of Professional Conduct. So I'm the only one who has to, but at the county level, at Bonner County level, none of us do. And so that's an excellent question, and it's a difficult one. We can agree, I guess, but that's all it is just a promise from us that we would adhere to some code of conduct or code of ethics. It is not a legal requirement.
Even in how they treat my commissioner and shutting her off of her vote. I mean, she's the commissioner over my district, and they did not allow her a vote on multiple occasions. That sounds to me like it's not exactly either legal or ethical.
Sherry, we're that issue right now. I do, as a preliminary matter, without really giving a legal opinion at this point, I share your concern that all elected officials should be allowed to speak, and in part not only speak, but be allowed to vote. And so just because you may have a majority, I don't think you can foreclose the third commissioner from voting and speaking on an issue. But again, that is an issue we're looking at. We can't give you a definitive answer on that right now.
Thank you.
I think it's worth noting is the lack of being able to give that answer isn't a reflection. It's of the prosecutor's office. It's that really the supervisor of the elected official is the people. And you guys are the ones that are supposed to check local government. And so you would need a history of this happening. And from what I actually had the same question at the Idaho Association of Counties, and this is new to have something like this happen. And so you don't have a case before to say this is the comparison. We are lucky to be the first case, I guess, in this regard, but there's nothing that says you cannot do that. You rely on, in this case, and Marshall can correct me if I'm wrong, but you're relying on the integrity of the individuals that are in those particular seats to care about the presentation, to care about the character aspect, that there's not a rule to influence. Because We don't want to have more rules and more laws. We want people that just respect mutually.
Yeah, so Asia makes a good point. So we have this thing called the Idaho Association of Counties. It's been around for decades and decades, and they're just basically an advisory group that helps counties deal with issues. But when you go to them with a serious issue like this, they basically, their advice is, well, work together. You know, you should sit down and work together and be a team. I agree. That's absolutely 100% true. But the question then becomes, well, what happens when your team isn't functioning and isn't working together? You know, what are the rules? And the Idaho Association of Counties or the Attorney General's office, they don't really have an answer for those things. They fall back on, well, you just need to talk, or you need to listen to your prosecutor. Well, like Asia said earlier, the commissioners don't have to listen to the prosecutor. All we do is advise. We can't tell them what to do, for good reason. Your lawyer, you did not elect me to be a county commissioner, and I don't want to be a county commissioner. I have no right to tell them what to do. It's just advice.
Commissioner Ahmed, if you want to have your seat here, you're welcome to it. And I think that's a good opportunity to address the quorum thing, because this isn't a decision. And I think this is part of why people misunderstand the roles and functions. So 2 commissioners being in the same room isn't a quorum. If we were going to be in the same room and we were going to make a decision about something, that's where we have to pay attention. Can you kind of expand on that? Because even as a commissioner, we should recognize what is a quorum and what isn't, and what is allowed and what's not with respect to seeing 2 people in the same space at the same time.
The Idaho Open Meeting Act is a strange creature. It really is. So open meetings only apply in the county, only apply to the commissioners. They don't apply to me, don't apply to the sheriff, don't apply to the clerk. So we can do anything we feel like in terms of meeting with whoever we want, talk to them, and we don't have to disclose it. If writings occur, they might become public records. So that's a different act, and we might have to disclose those writings. But if we're just talking to people, like if you call me and I talk to you on the phone, I don't have to disclose that to anyone. The commissioners are different. Cities are kind of strange in that regard too. Only the city councils have to adhere to the Open Meetings Act. The mayor, who is in charge of the city technically, does not. So the mayor can do all of those things and not have to be subject to the Open Meetings Act. Why they did it, I'm not entirely sure that way, but it is what it is, and that's what the law is. However, it is only when you are making the decision or deliberating. Okay, well, what does deliberate mean? Well, deliberate means that there has to be something, some issue that you are talking about or actively working on to make a decision in the future. So this gets asked a lot of times, and commissioners want to be safe about it, which I totally understand and support. But they're afraid that if 2 of them are together or 3 of them together, that is a quorum and that they are then deliberating. Well, you have to say, well, what are you deliberating about? You have to ask the easy questions, and if you can't really answer that, you're probably not in an open meeting, and you're not doing a violation. So if they go down to a conference together, if they go to a wedding together, if they do any of those things, they are not deliberating towards making a decision. That is perfectly legal. So just because you see 2 commissioners or 3 commissioners together, that is not a violation of the Open Meetings Act.
Does everybody get that? Because I think we get that a lot in this county, because we want people to be able to come, for example, in this venue and hear and be part of something, but to not have people feel like we're doing something wrong by all being in the same room. That's really important to recognize that, because this is how we gain information. Can I ask you to use the microphone now, just because we have Zoom? Thank you, sir.
Dan Welly for the record. Just to shorten it up, effectively, unless there's a motion on the floor, it's not a meeting. You're deliberating on a motion.
I would not agree with that. If it's an issue that is likely going to become before the board, regardless of whether there's a motion or not, and the commissioners that are there are actively taking part in talking or anything like that, regardless of whether there's a motion, that could be a violation.
A good example for you is the Tischler Buys presentation on whether or not we should do impact fees. There is no decision happening at that meeting. It's informative, but a decision could come out of having received that presentation. Therefore, that meeting was noticed because they all have a quorum, because we could potentially make a decision.
Okay,
This meeting, we're not making a decision, so there's no issue related to that. Is that a good
so if
comparison?
another commissioner had been sitting in here and somebody challenged him on an issue and it would have come up in the, on the agenda or in the commissioners meeting, that would have established you as a quorum.
If you mean ask a specific question about
Yes.
an item?
Yeah.
I don't think that's not what it's meaning. It's if together we are working on something, deliberating, like on impact fees, consider that that's an outside presentation. And so if we're going to then have a meeting later that says, should we engage Tischler Buys for impact fees? That first meeting is a quorum because out of that meeting, we will come to a decision. The meeting itself is coming to a decision. You're saying if an individual asks a question, that's not the same as what the purpose
I
is.
wasn't saying, I was trying to shorten it up and abbreviate it, but it seems that this law is both multifaceted and obscure.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, I agree. Well, you know, they make laws so lawyers stay in business. Because we don't actually produce anything.
It's the return customer for the lawyer. Any other questions on quorums and two commissioners in the same room?
Yes.
Sherry?
I have a couple of scenarios that were brought to me. One is there's several employees, and this goes back to the previous board for the most part, but there's several employees that complained that when the commission.
Sherry, you muted, she muted herself?
No, I didn't mute myself.
Sherry,
But can you hear me now?
Sherry, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
So before you read your list of questions, remember the disclaimer on having the prosecutor here. It can't be something specific that he asked.
Okay, I'm talking about the impressions of having illegal meetings.
Okay.
Okay, and the only way I can do that is to explain scenarios.
No worries. You remember the disclaimer.
Is that okay?
Yep.
A scenario that when the commissioner's office door gets locked and the blinds get pulled down, you know they're having an illegal meeting. All right. That was brought to me on several occasions at the previous board. I'm not saying this board. Okay. Also, when two commissioners will walk into a meeting and never have a discussion on something new, but they totally agree on everything. Now, those are scenarios that the public is questioning. How do you respond to people when they bring that up?
Okay, so I think there are 43 or 44 taxing districts here in Bonner County. There's a lot more than you realize because there's water districts, sewer districts, all kinds of stuff. I have jurisdiction over 43 out of 44 of those districts. So if people are making complaints, I don't know, let's say the West Ponderay School District. I'm laughing because there's a lot of complaints about that. Those all come to my office and I have jurisdiction over that. I do not have jurisdiction over the Bonner County Board of Commissioners because they're my clients. The Attorney General, interestingly enough, is one thing where he does not have jurisdiction without being appointed as a special prosecutor. So I would have to ask some other prosecutor or the Attorney General, likely I would probably ask the Attorney General for this, and I have, to look at a matter to see whether the board has violated the Open Meetings Act. Well, when you're a prosecutor, an outside person, the first thing you ask is, well, what evidence do you have of that? And all I can say is, well, employees are speculating that the board seems like they're on the same page, or, you know, they have these closed door meetings and the blinds are closed. That's not good enough. And so the answer is you have to still have evidence. Just because you expect something or suspect something doesn't mean that you have the evidence to prove it, especially when you're dealing with an outside prosecutor. So what we try to do is we just try to counsel, as my office, civil counsel, tries to counsel them against that, and hopefully they listen to it. But there are plenty of times, I can really say honestly, where it seems like the commissioners may have been talking with each other where they really haven't. They just are on the same page because they believe the same thing.
Okay, thank you.
We've got Reg Crawford up.
And I'm leaning into the microphone.
I know, I was want to give credit for that. All right,
Hello, Reg Crawford. I'd like to talk about the executive sessions before this meeting ends. I know in the past I've been to these meetings and people have said there's been problems with going to executive sessions for items that weren't eligible for executive sessions, and that people were directed to complain to the Attorney General. However, the Attorney General's handbook clearly states that it's the county prosecuting attorneys who enforce the open meeting law in relation to local public agencies within their respective jurisdictions. So when there is a violation of open meeting laws or executive, let's say executive sessions specifically, isn't it your responsibility and not the Attorney General's who does address these? Thank you.
It is, to the sense that I have to find a special prosecutor, whether that is my colleague in Kootenai County or the Attorney General. I have to then send that to that person. We cannot look at open meeting violations or executive sessions, whatever you want to call it, concerning our clients, the Board of Commissioners.
would it be accurate to say your role is a facilitator of it, not that you're the person in charge, but you facilitate the investigation into that issue?
Correct. We put together a packet and we ship it to whoever is going to look at it.
And so I've explained on executive session that the way it should work, and I would like you kind of to expand on this, as that if we're talking about a personnel issue, that once we get to specifics, that's when we go in executive session. But the general generic human resource information is something that we do in public. And so can you kind of give some light to the narrow scope of executive session? Because that's one of the questions that we have over and over again in our county of, executive session is not the running commentary to kind of get to divulge all of your issues and then come in front of the meeting. It's supposed to be the opposite. And in some arguments, the dysfunction during the morning meeting can be attributed to the fact that there isn't that closed door meeting that's happening where you have the meeting of the mind so you can put on the right dress clothes for the public. But can you kind of expand on narrow scope and executive session for the community?
Yeah. So again, it goes back to kind of the way that our framers here in Idaho piece together county government. And it's interesting, and frankly, it's pretty smart in a lot of ways. But just like we learned back in civics class or government class that there's separation of powers, there's separation of powers within here at the county as well. And there's different branches of government on a local level, but they're mixed. Some of the actors have dual functions, and I'll tell you what I'm talking about. The Board of Commissioners primarily is a legislative body, and as a legislative body, they are clearly subject to open meetings. And by that, you do deal with employees in a legislative sense, in the sense that they are setting salaries and they are setting budgets for the different offices and the different departments. And so in that sense, it has to all be out in the open. However, because certain departments fall under the Board of Commissioners and not the sheriff or me or the clerk or any of the other elected officials, they're not acting in a legislative sense when they're dealing with their own employees. They're dealing in an executive function at that time. And so when they're dealing with an executive sense, they're dealing with individual employees, those things should not be out in the public and they are not subject to Open Meetings Act. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm another one that has a dual function. I'm primarily under the Idaho Constitution. I'm a judicial officer, but I'm also an executive officer as well, in the sense that I'm the head of law enforcement with the sheriff. So it's another dual role. The clerk has a dual role as well, but he is primarily a judicial officer. But when he's acting as a recorder and things like that, feeds back into the executive function too. Some commissioners in the past, none on this current board, but your predecessor, I think, openly did, so I can call him out for that. Jeff Conley talked about going to a county manager system. It takes a vote of the people, but it essentially takes the power away from the elected officials and puts them under a county manager or county administrator who answers to the Board of Commissioners. It's a change of government, but it is allowed under the Idaho Code. Fortunately for Commissioner Conley, I think he wanted to direct me, but I'm a judicial officer, so constitutionally he figured out that I'm the one officer that cannot be underneath a county administrator. And I think he gave it up after that time.
For
it wasn't
other
worth his
functions,
while. Yeah. So that's the only way that sort of county commissioners can take over the role over almost everyone except for the prosecuting attorney and sort of rule the county in that sense. But no one does that. None of the counties have that system of government. And if our Board of Commissioners decided that that's really what they wanted to do, they would have to take it to a vote of the people, which would probably lose. For
Any
good
other
reason.
questions before we go to the next thing? Wayne, can you deliver the microphone back since you're all the way up front? You have one to the left and one to the right. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So what you basically answered to Sherry was the appearance of impropriety is just that, an appearance. It isn't an act of
Right.
impropriety. However, we have witnessed in the past acts of impropriety on the board. Pick a board, not necessarily this current board, okay? But you are advising them that certain acts are not proper.
Correct.
Your advice protects them against county lawsuits, correct?
It helps to. Also, when you're talking about the Open Meetings Act, and with executive sessions and just other violations, there are a lot of times it's a cure. If they acknowledge what they did or the decision they made was wrong, they can come back and cure it. And a lot of times that works, and that's always our advice, is really to be safe. Unless we think a clear cut is not a violation, we recommend that they just cure it, which, there's some political capital that they have to decide, but legally that's the best move, is to just say, hey, wait, we may have made a mistake here and did something that wasn't agendized properly, or we shouldn't have been in this executive session. We're just agendizing it for the next meeting. We'll do it in public. And that cures it, and that sort of obviates or stops the need to send it out for prosecution. Because the goal of the Open Meetings Act is for the people to have part in the decision-making process. It's not to, prosecute or give civil penalties to county commissioners.
Many of us are very concerned that we don't know who to turn to, because we see it's a number of people that come here to participate in our county government that we have elected, to see meetings that are put in recess and then dismissed without discussion, without a vote, without any formal decision of the commissioners, leaving us not knowing even to leave the room and knowing that this was not a proper act. So we're very concerned that we want to know who to go to, where we can actually get results for violations that we feel very slighted as voters and as the people that expect these people to do what we need them to do in a proper fashion. So you give advice, and if it's egregious, you get a special prosecutor. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So letters to you would be able to kick into play that process of getting a special prosecutor. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. That is true. You can also contact the Attorney General, but you will likely get the response back from the Attorney General that he does not have jurisdiction. He has, so with the people always think, a lot of people think things for because it's logical. My father, for instance, God rest his soul, but my dad,
It's logical, it's the way we go.
my dad was not logical, but he always thought like the attorney general should be my boss because everyone should answer to someone. That's what my dad said. And I said, Dad, I do. I answer to the voters of Bonner County. They can vote me out if they think I'm doing a bad job. But the attorney general is not my boss. But so the attorney general has very limited jurisdiction in the enforcement of penal codes, again, criminal codes, and issues with county government as well. He has jurisdiction over crimes committed by county elected officials. That's basically it. And then there's some obscure stuff that he has jurisdiction over too, but it's not something you would think of in the general. It's not murder. It's not generalized crime, but that's basically it. So if one of these people, including myself, the elected officials, have committed a crime while in office and not, battering our wife, it would have to be while we were associated with our role in public. The attorney general has jurisdiction over that, and that's it. So a lot of times I think people may be frustrated with me or frustrated with the process, and they think, well, I'm going to write the attorney general and he'll look at this and he'll take over. And I think they're probably disappointed because they get a letter back saying, I don't have jurisdiction, ma'am. I'm sorry, you need to contact your county prosecutor. And they're like, well, I hate Marshall and he doesn't do anything anyway, so I'm stuck here in the Netherlands. I have nothing I can do. There is really nothing. And that's not true. I do listen. It's just, again, we have to have evidence of wrongdoing. And there are so many complaints right now that I can't tell you about them all because, a lot of them are confidential, but there's so many complaints coming in on so many issues that we are kind of overwhelmed with this. And like I started off, 90% of my job is prosecuting crime. I have a murder trial I'm starting on Thursday. That's supposed to be my focus. And I'm good at doing those things. I'm not as good at doing these type of things. But that doesn't matter. I need to do them anyway. But we're inundated right now with complaints of a wide variety of things.
We're gonna go in order because there's online, but Christine.
Thank you for coming today, for starters. It's nice to be able to bend your ear in person. So with regards to the executive sessions, I would agree, and I think obviously we have a lot of questions here about it, that it's abused in some cases. And you see, like Asia has said, it just says executive session personnel. And in other boards, we see this week after week or month after month with no explanation. And especially in situations where they're volunteer boards or something, you're like, how do they have personnel every single week when they only have one hired personnel and that personnel is part of the executive session kind of thing? So, I mean, how do you hold those boards accountable for that when there's no recording of what they discuss in executive session? And sometimes they've been in there for 3 hours discussing this, literally 3 hours. And then afterwards, they just come out and leave. And so there's not even like a formal closure of the meeting where we're invited back in. And it's frustrating when we sit in our car for 3 hours because the building's locked. We can't even access the bathroom because they say the room, you can hear through it. How do you answer that for me?
It's hard, and a lot of times when you're dealing with the smaller entities, I mean, our county commissioners, some of it is actually good, the fact that they don't get along because they hold each other accountable in a sense. I'd rather they did get along, trust me, but one of the benefits is they hold each other accountable, and they are far less likely to actually violate some of the executive sessions than smaller boards. Smaller boards, volunteers, they don't really understand the law as well, and why would they? They're there to do whatever their function is, whether it's a water district or whatever. I mean, that's what they care about, is delivering water to their district. They're not as concerned about the rules and regulations of Idaho law and the intricacies of it. They also, many of those boards can't afford attorneys, and so that's an issue for them. They don't have somebody there saying, hey, you really need to stay on point. That is one of the jobs. A long time ago, I was county civil counsel before I became elected. And one of our jobs with our boards is to basically not tell them what to do again, but to be like, hey, you're getting a little bit adrift here. We went in under personnel to talk about employee we're now starting to talk about budget issues. We need to stay back on track. So it's the function of the attorney, but when you're talking about small districts, it's a much more difficult issue. The only thing that I think you can do as a member of the public is, again, make the complaints to the board first, to that board, and say, hey, you were in there for 3 hours. You're forcing us to sit out of the parking lot. How can you possibly be talking about this one protected issue for 3 hours? And hopefully those board members will recognize this is an executive session is not a license to just start talking about whatever they want to talk about.
Is there a requirement that more information be put out there? Like Asia's been pushing for, that it just doesn't just say personnel, but personnel, ... and give more information. Like, I know when they've been putting more information for us, then we know if we really want to sit around for 3 hours, versus personnel could be they're firing somebody, they're hiring somebody, or there's a specific issue that maybe we want to hang around, like hiring for this department that we might be interested in or something like that.
There was a recommendation put forth under the previous Attorney General, Lawrence Wasden, that addressed just that. I don't know if you can call it any more than a recommendation, but it's something that I think we adhere to or should adhere to, because he's right. And I don't think Attorney General Labrador would disagree with this at all. That executive sessions, oftentimes, when they just have the code section and then the subsection which outlines that it's either legal or personnel, is insufficient to give the public notice as to what it is. So I can't tell my board or clerk that they have to agendize that, but I agree with Asia on that, in the sense that there should be a little bit more. I know you can't put a ton. So if you're talking about personnel and you're going to can some employee, obviously you can't say personnel, Bill Wilson, we're going to fire him. Right?
He's not on Zoom, so it's okay.
Yeah.
So do you
So
know?
I want to give a chance to, we've got.
Let me
three
just
in
ask
our
two-
time. No, we have 3 up there.
I just
and-
want to know the code to reference that.
Oh, yeah.
There's no code. It just comes under the executive session 74-206 or whatever it is.
74-206.
Yeah.
Okay, and finally,
We'll come
our
back to you.
Okay.
Because I want to go Karen, Doug, Reg, because we
Okay.
have to let them have 15 minutes. And then this guy in the chair there, maybe. Reg. All right, Miss Karen, you're up.
Good morning, and thank you for coming, Mr. Marshall. This has been very helpful. My question is that it feels like to me that I'm interested in the litigation costs for Bonner County for both civil and criminal. How would you do a public information request to get that information? Who do you address it to? How can I learn what cases, outcome, and costs, and like maybe for the last 3 years?
Mm-hmm. Some of it would be privileged, but most of it is not. With criminal litigation, you should just do a request for my budget. Almost all of my litigation costs in criminal are going to be personnel. Just you're paying my salary and my deputy prosecutor's salary and my staff salary. We don't spend a whole lot in terms of outside experts or things of that nature. Most of our experts are employed by the state. We utilize the state lab. We do pay the medical examiner, but it's not as much because we have good contracts. Defense costs a lot more than prosecution in the criminal world, but just make a public records request with my office for my budget. For civil's far more expensive. There's no surprise there, and it clearly is an issue for us that I think all the elected officials acknowledge. It's one thing I think the Board of Commissioners agrees on, all three of them, that they're paying way too much money for our civil defense. Some of that is the nature of the beast. We're not the only county that's getting sued, and times are changing here in Idaho to where we're becoming more of a pro-plaintiff state. We used to be a very, very strong pro-defense, civil defense, government defense. People did not want to see their taxpayer dollars going to a claim that they feel is not legitimate. That's changing for whatever reason it is. I don't know if it's people that have moved here. I don't know if it's just a change in mentality, but you're seeing a lot more bigger judgments for employees who have left, who have been fired, things of that nature. So those You can make specific requests, public records requests to the clerk's office or to the Board of Commissioners about ongoing civil litigation defense costs. Whether you get those outlined or not, I don't know. There could be some privilege issues there, but by and large, you should be able to obtain the numbers, the big numbers from Bonner County, and they are big. But to be honest with you, we're all looking, and it's another issue I think that all the elected officials have agreed on. We're trying to reach out to ICRIMP, the insurance pool, the liability and property insurance pool here in Idaho, with a potential that maybe we'll go back under first dollar insurance. And that premium is going to be a big number that we don't know what it is, but trust me, it's going to be an eye-opening number as well. So whether we self-insure and pay the lawyers, the outside lawyers, or whether we pay a big check to our insurance carrier, neither number is going to be something that you're going to like.
I have a question. Would you clarify the name of the liability insurance company again?
Yeah, it's ICRIMP, the Idaho County Risk Management Pool, right? Did I get all the acronym right?
But Karen, when you want to look them up, just ICRMP. That's how they're listed on the web.
Are we contracted with them now?
No. We used to be. We are the Ada County and Bonner County are the only two counties in Idaho that don't. This was done, going on almost 10 years now that we broke away from them. And there were certainly reasons at the time that we did. And we've had, I don't want to sound like it's all been bad because it hasn't. We saved a lot of money by going to first party insurance. What happens with these insurance pools or any insurer that you're dealing with is they look at, a loss run for a period of years and they average. Right. So we had some big lawsuits before 2010. There were a couple in the sheriff's office, and this is now, I know it's dating me a little bit here, but we had some big losses and ICRIMP had really jacked up our premiums. And I think the commissioners at the time and myself were kind of like, and I think Rosedale was here too at that time. It wasn't before Marie Scott days, but just kind of looked at it and been like, geez, these premiums are really outrageous because we don't have much losses. We were doing really well. And so we decided to make the switch over to self-insurance. But now, as I said, the climate in Idaho is changing and the awards, the plaintiffs' awards are really high. And there's good reason for the commissioners and the other elected officials to be looking to maybe get under ICRIMP or some other first dollar insurance again.
Thank you. I'll let somebody else go, but this gives me a baseline.
We'll do Doug next, and after Doug, Fred, and then Reg will have her second, and then we'll go back here and see if you have more. All right?
Okay, thank you again, Lewis Marshall. This is Maureen Patterson, but I'm under my husband's name. Anyway, what I wanted to ask has to do with our school district and our elected officials, our school board. Okay, and at one of the meetings, one of the trustees said that in order to discuss the superintendent's contract, which is almost always that I know of, discussed in executive session, that they needed a 2/3 majority. And since they had only 3 out of 5, which was a 60%, not a 66%, they went ahead and she wanted it discussed in open meeting. So they discussed it in open meeting. Do you know anything about that? Was she accurate, really? And because I've always heard the superintendent contract is discussed in the details of it are discussed in executive session instead of open meeting like it was.
I want to cut a little disclaimer here because you gave us a very specific example that Marshall doesn't have the information. I think the question that's reasonable to ask out of what you stated is there a law that requires the superintendent contract to be discussed in executive session since it's essentially a personnel document? That's reasonable, not your specific situation, because that's providing legal advice. Unless you.
Well, there's two questions and they're good ones, Maureen. I'm just shooting It is, it's not a majority vote to go into executive session. Is it? Yeah, I think it's 2/3. I think it's 66 and not 60, but I could be wrong on that. But I think it's 66.
It's 2/3.
2/3, yeah. See, she's here to back me up.
All right, Fred,
So he
gotta
thinks,
wind down, 'cause he's gotta.
right, it's 2/3.
Okay, quick. One of the concerns I always have is what I don't.
Did you hear what Asia
You listed the procedure to solicit a legal response if a citizen felt that a crime had been committed. What recourse does the citizen have if he jumped every hoop that you said and then some and heard nothing back from anyone?
Maybe no recourse, but my suggestion is to be the squeaky wheel and to keep, especially if you're dealing with like me and my office. And the reason why I'm saying that is that I don't want to say I'm a bad bureaucrat, but I'm not really a bureaucrat. And I'll tell you what I'm saying is my job is a little different than the other elected officials in that I have an active caseload that I work on. So I'm not just answering the phones and emailing people. So for instance, starting Thursday, I'm going to be in a murder trial. So for Thursday, Friday, and then the following week, I will be encompassed in that murder trial. I will still be getting 100 emails a day. I will not be answering them, and they will be out of my mind. I won't even be thinking about them because I can't do it. So I know that there are constituents that are sometimes like, Marshall's just blowing me off. He doesn't care. Right.
No.
I know that. When the reality is probably I am doing something else and I am just not able to do, I get spread really thin.
Yeah, it wasn't just you.
No, it's okay.
I mean, it was pretty extensive.
My suggestion is to keep at it, because if you keep on me personally, I know that I'll be like, oh yeah, that guy wanted this or that. And then I either make sure, because a lot of times I'll assign it to one of my people too and be like, hey, Bill, answer this. And then if he's not doing it, then if you stay on my case, I can be like, oh yeah, I gave that to Wilson, but he must not have. So then I drag him in. Why are you not answering this?
I'm thinking you're going to get an email later on this afternoon.
Yeah.
And I think one thing I want to say before he gives a little bit of a summary and we try to go back around again is that some people are looking for that human resources department that can start do the write-up and the removing, and that is not county government. And that's a solution that we don't have. We don't have a department that will come down and say, Asia, you will do this. And some people think that it's the prosecutor, but that isn't the prosecutor. I wanted to, and I know we're going over, we can be late on the next meeting a little bit, but what I want you to kind of give a summary on, because there are two things that are happening new, and it's going to impact the prosecutor's office. So one of them is that we are moving to the position where it's the prosecutor's office that will address the child-related porn issue. And so that impacts that's been an increase in our government. But then kind of giving a summary of the success of your office with respect to the case where we had the drug dealer and you won that case. You reported out on Central Committee about what you did, but I think the community needs to know, because this kind of can feel like it's a lot of what he can't do. So I'd like you to kind of end on what do you do on a positive note, because people don't see you on the other level. We see you as the email person.
So if we've been having this meeting 10 years ago, I would have had a lot of questions about cases and what are you doing about the meth problem and things of that nature. It shows you where we have gone as a society. And again, I have no commentary on that. It's just, it is what it is. And that the interest is not so much in what I do 90% of the time in the criminal world. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's an acknowledgement that, hey, things are going pretty well and we don't have these huge issues with you, Marshall. We don't think you're dropping the ball that much. I don't know. Or maybe it's just everyone's really interested in county politics and county government now. I think it's probably more the latter, that's where the focus is. But we are doing a lot of things out in the criminal world that are important. We have significant issues with drugs. We always really have. but the drugs have changed over the years. We had a big time methamphetamine. When I came into this job as a deputy prosecutor and then the elected prosecutor, we had meth labs here in Bonner County. We don't have that anymore. It's not because I kicked some butt and got rid of all of them. It's supply and demand, and now the cartels in Mexico really produce it all. We don't have to have locally produced meth. Unfortunately, we were doing fairly well in fighting methamphetamine, and then this thing called fentanyl came along. We'd always had heroin and opiates, but fentanyl is a whole new ball game, and it just sort of swooped in, and it's taken rural America just by storm. And we have not been. We're right in the middle of it, frankly. And so again, it's from the Mexican cartels who have networks that extend into Bonner County, through Bonner County, up to Bonner's Ferry and into western Montana. They have just total known distribution networks. And so when we take out local drug dealers, there's another one to take their place. By and large, it's mainly local people that are dealing with the cartels. The cartels, some of them do come into Bonner County, but a lot of the transactional basis is in Washington and Tri-Cities or Spokane Valley. So then they just bring it up here and distribute from there. So that has been very difficult fighting that. We tried with the Idaho State Legislature to do what they call it's called a Len Bias. And for those who don't remember, he was a really, really good basketball player back in the 80s, and people argued that he was going to be as good as Michael Jordan or maybe even better. He died of cocaine, and they went after the drug dealer that did it. We don't really have that here at the local level. We've tried to convince the legislature that we do need it, but they do have it at the federal level, and the U.S. Attorney's Office has been really pretty good in helping us take some of those cases. And so we have worked in partnership with them, which that's a good thing. So we're trying to fight that. Some of the child porn laws are getting stronger for us, which that's a good thing too. I know a lot of people kind of feel like, well, it's just pictures or it's just videos, and remember there's an actual victim out there for any of those things. The other thing is there's an excellent study that was done in Kansas many years ago, and they conclusively showed that for everyone who is convicted of just possession of the material, it was like 78% of them had over 20 actual victims, not have gotten caught for, but had over 20 actual victims out there before they got caught for the pornography. So there's a direct nexus. It's not just, oh, they're just snooping around the internet and they hit this by mistake. We obviously sort those ones out. When we go back and look, we can see if somebody hit it by mistake or their kid was looking through it and he did it. We make sure that the people are actually the people we're going after before we go after them. I don't want to be prosecuting innocent people. You do hear that sometimes. Well, the DA just wants to stats, and it's like, oh, really? Prosecuting innocent people? That's a really good stat I want. Yeah. I laughed that I actually had a man arrested for murder that was actually innocent. And I don't think I had really ever prosecuted anyone that was innocent before until I picked at first-degree murder. Not like shoplifting or something like that. I could have prosecuted an innocent person for that. Nope, I choose first-degree murder when I went big. And that was very embarrassing, and it's actually one of the ones that it was on Forensic Files. So I actually had a TV show where I had to admit that I arrested the wrong guy for murder. So, yeah.
So he's got to ignore some emails so he doesn't do that again. I want to go to Jacob. Do we have time to allow a couple more questions, or do you need to switch it off? Okay, so we're going to do it in order to go back to her with one question each, because there's 3 online. That way we can allow him to go back.
I just wanted to ask if Fair Board members are considered county officials.
I believe the answer to that is yes.
Okay.
I don't think that is clear cut, but we have looked at that issue, and they fit all the boxes that we've looked that make them county officials. So yes, my opinion is they do.
Reg Crawford?
Thank
Wayne Martin, you had no questions?
Okay, I'm back. Reg Crawford. Again, I do thank you for being here. I don't mean to sound combative, but when it comes to open meeting laws and executive sessions, I've heard you say that you've got tons of letters, and I'm wondering, and yet that nothing can be done at the same time. So I'm curious, what would trigger action when we keep seeing these violations over and over? And I've got the Idaho Handbook on Open Meeting Laws open on my desk right now. And again, I'll point out it does say that you are the person responsible for that we report this to. Does the public have to open a lawsuit to get this addressed? I'm just so curious as what is the answer? Thank you.
No, and you probably wouldn't have standing, to be honest with you, to do a lawsuit. You could certainly explore that with an attorney, but my guess is they're going to say that you don't have standing to sue us or sue me over that. But I don't want it to come to that point. Obviously, a lot of times we do send out correspondence, or we talk to the boards or whatever the district are where the violation has potentially occurred, and they do agree to cure it. And that is a way of fixing it. But if you have specific examples, Reg, just bring them to my attention, and I'll see if there's meat on the bones. But yeah, I don't want to give you the impression that I'm just here to whitewash bad behavior by other districts, because I'm not. And again, if you're talking about the Board of Commissioners, I'm going to send that out. I can't handle that myself. I have to send that out, and I will do that. But it has to be a little bit more than just some sort of conclusory, well, we think that they were talking together and ergo, we think they violated the Open Meetings Act. There has to be something I can give to the special prosecutor.
So Reg, send him some examples, and if you want, you can copy me, and then we can get a review and response, and maybe discuss what is and what isn't in an open meeting to kind of give real life comparison.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Doug, you have your hand up. That'll be the last one for the
Okay, thank you very much. Statute, I'm just wondering, is there a statute for executive session for the superintendent contracts, and where to look for that?
You know, it would just come under the general hiring, so it'll be subsection A. But, and again, I'm not going to give a legal opinion right now, but to me, just off the top of my head, I think there are probably some concerns with that. I would think that probably the school district would want to do it in an open meeting, but maybe they have a good legal argument. I don't know. That has not been a complaint that's been brought to me, so we have not looked at that. But I think you might be on the right track there. That should be done. That's what we would say. I mean, the commissioner, let's say we're talking about my salary, or a department head, let's say it's not an elected official. The superintendent's not elected, he's appointed, he or she. It's a county department head, Jason Top, Road and Bridge. They would be doing that in open, basically. I mean, they could talk about some things in personnel, but when you get down to salaries, it's gotta be done in open.
All right, so with
Thank
that, Commissioner Chat, thank you all for coming. Next week will be our Road and Bridge Jason Top.
Hey, that was a good segue.
Good segue. All right, thank
He's
you.
a buddy of mine.
And thank you.